It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity tonight to have this kind of a program on our Ramaz airwaves, and it's so great to have so many of you joining us for it. Before we begin, as we do each of our Zoom programs, we want to acknowledge and pray for all those who are ill during this time period and wish them a refuah shlema. We are with you and hope that you get better quickly and soon. And to all those who have lost loved ones during this time, we send you our condolences, and we stand together as a community. And of course, we want to thank and show our appreciation for all of the medical frontline professionals and others who are on the front lines doing God's work each day. Thank you for what you do. Stay healthy and safe. And now for this evening's program. I want to begin by acknowledging that tonight's program is sponsored by Cassie Scherzer Alter, class of 1984. Cassie Alter is a speech pathologist and the owner of LA Speech Therapy Solutions, which is a network of rehabilitation clinics in Los Angeles. Cassie has dedicated her career to working with and helping children with developmental delays to help them reach their potential. She is dedicating tonight's program Le'ilui Nishmat Saadia Yehoshua ben Eliezer, the brother of Anne Ehrenreich, Ramaz class of 1980, who is Cassie's sister-in-law. Saadia was a highly accomplished young man with Down syndrome who died in April of the COVID disease at the age of 35. Saadia spent 4 years learning in a yeshiva in Israel and was a member of the inaugural class of Yeshiva University's Makor program for individuals with special needs. He was scheduled to graduate in May with a YU degree. Anne Ehrenreich recalls that her brother Saadia embodied simple joy, love, and kindness. May this program be a zechus for him and for his entire family. It is so appropriate to have this sponsorship. Tonight's program is also sponsored by Linda Sklar, class of 76, in honor of the Lassner family, with particular acknowledgement to Danielle Lassner, who was her favorite teacher in high school. We have an outstanding panel of speakers this evening and an amazing story to tell. We will be moderated by Jamie Lassner, but I'll begin with who the panel is, and we'll get to know everyone quite well as the evening progresses. We start with Howard Blas. Howard Blas currently serves as director of the National Ramah Tikva Network of the National Ramah Commission and of Tikva programs at Camp Ramah in Northern California. Howard led several Ramah Israel trips and served as a group leader for the Shorashim Birthright Asperger trips to Israel. He is currently traveling across the United States, visiting innovative job sites and training programs for people with disabilities. A social worker and special education teacher by training, he teaches Jewish studies and bar and bat mitzvah to students with a range of disabilities and special circumstances. Howard writes regularly for many Jewish and secular publications, which include the Jerusalem Post, Chabad, the New York, the New Normal, and Sightline, which is from the Covenant Foundation. He has received numerous awards for his, and most recently, he received the Covenant Award for Excellence in Jewish Education in 2013. Howard is married to Ronit Simintov and is the proud father of 4 Ramaz graduates, Daniel, Abigail, Elisheva, and Hannah. Our moderator, James Lassner, Jamie, as we all like to call him. Jamie is the proud member of the class of 1982. One of his claims to fame, actually, is that he was the original Ramaz mascot. Born in Bogota, Colombia, he came to the U.S. in 1970 and went to Ramaz where he graduated with honors for his personality. He graduated with a degree in finance and psychology from Baruch College, the University of the City of New York. And for 25 years, he worked in recycling and reclamation of metals. He then went on for 6 years to make a tremendous difference at the Magen David Yeshiva in Brooklyn as the director of student life. Most recently, he serves as the executive director of Friends of Access Israel. Jamie is also known as someone who has volunteered for over 3 decades for Hatzalah and was injured during the September 11th attacks. He continues to be a tremendous advocate for people with PTSD. In his current role as the executive director of Friends of Access Israel, his goal is to globally improve accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities and the elderly, and to enable them to live a normal, healthy life, allowing them to work, travel, study, and live with dignity, equality, and the maximum level of independence. He is the proud son of Danielle Lassner, the Dean of Admissions for Ramaz for many, many years, the husband of Mara Lassner, and father of Sam, class of 2011, and Adam, class of 2015. Joey Sokol, class of 89, born and raised in Great Neck, New York. Joey attended Ramaz High School, graduating in 89. He proudly wore his varsity yellow jacket, hockey. Make sure you don't mix it up with basketball because he was a real hockey man. He wore that for 3 of his years. He graduated NYU School of Business and currently serves as the president of Milton Sokol and Company, DeMar Leather, which is the oldest merchant leather business in the United States. Together with his wife, Susie, he is the proud parent of Yasmin, who graduated class of 2019, and our rising senior Erin, class of 2021. And finally, Mara Lassner. Mara is the proud mother of 2 Ramaz alumni and married to Jamie, the wife of Jamie Lassner, a wonderful, wonderful alum, as we talked about. But Mara, in her own right, works as the Director of Public Relations and Advertising at Ramaz. She loves the outdoors, hiking and physical activity. She has participated in running and duathlon competitions, and while she did train for the Kilimanjaro climb, nothing prepared her for the challenge that she went up against, which you'll hear about. She is grateful for the support and positive attitude of her fellow trekkers that got her to the top. What Mara will not say, and I and others can, and anyone that knows her knows, is that she is involved in so much chesed and helping people of all different needs in our community and in many communities. Each day of her life, she does so much for so many. So we are so proud to have her on with us this evening, as we are this entire panel. In advance, thank you all for both what you do each day, but also for being on with us tonight. I now hand it over to James Lassner. Just to remind you, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, and while you cannot be seen or heard, we will use the Q&A button and look at the questions, and Jamie will pose them to the panelists. Thank you, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Kenny, for inviting us to give this talk. I must say it is a emotional evening, because I do remember the Catalans. Eli was in my class, and have fond memories of Cassie, because she was in Andy's class, and I thank them for sponsoring this evening's event. If we could put up the slideshow, we're going to be speaking off of a slideshow, so that you don't have to look at our faces only, and that slideshow will come up momentarily. Okay, so this is, and we will explain in a minute, this is our entire team, with the exclusion of some of the porters. 27 of us entered those doors, which is the entrance to the park. and 25 of us made it to the top. If we could switch to the next slide. From the day I came to Ramaz in first grade, both Rabbi Joseph Lookstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and Yibadel Chaim Tovim, and Arukim, or as they say in the Sephardic, Shetiskele Shanim Rabot, Rabbi Haskell Lookstein instilled in us the importance of being our sisters and brothers' keeper. Whatever they did, whatever they said, they did. Rabbi Haskell Lookstein marched with us for Soviet Jewry. He encouraged me to go to Russia for Pesach, to meet with refuseniks and run 2 seders per night. He walked Mara and I through the horrors of the extermination camps in Poland. It was his vision that instilled in my son, Sam, and his class to take Mamadou to Israel, so he could experience what all the students that Mamadou loves experience. When Mamadou returned, his speeches at school and various upper school synagogues were the hottest ticket in town. Friends of Access Israel, or as we will probably refer to it most of the evening, FAISR, F-A-I-S-R, is very much a mikre that started with the Ramaz education. And as some of my friends know, the word mikre, if you jumble it around, the word mikre can be jumbled to Rak Hashem. It is very, very much, with much gratitude to God that I am blessed to have gone to Ramaz, and it is Ramaz who made me who I am. It is also Rabbi Lookstein who instilled in our board of trustees, Alan Brown and Abraham Eisenstadt, the right thing to do. He was a good friend. He is a good friend. He was a good friend to my father, to Abe's father, and to Alan's brother, a father of blessed memory. And when I was injured on 9/11, Rabbi Lookstein was the first one in the door. And when Alan was injured 32 years ago, he was the first one in the door to visit. Next slide. Alan Brown in the upper left corner was a Ramaz middle school graduate who suffered a spinal cord injury 32 years ago. He was on the phone with Victor Khaleesi, the gentleman with the glasses, who is the New York City Mayor's Office of People and Disabilities Commissioner. He had Michal in the middle, president of Access Israel, and patched in Allen, and they were talking. And Michal was talking about Access Israel and how Access Israel and what they do, and wanted to get Victor, the commissioner, involved. And Alan was pretty much the only Jewish kid he knew and knew the lingo about Israel. So he brought Alan in. Immediately after Alan hung up, Michal turns to Victor and goes, "Victor, Alan Brown, he was injured when I went to Ramaz. In 1988, Alan was injured and had a spinal cord injury. Victor confirmed that that is indeed the person, and minutes later, Michal got on the phone with Alan and invited him to come to Israel. Alan travels all over the United States as one of the biggest advocates for people with paraplegia. And Alan said to her, I would love to come to Israel, but the flight is too long, and Israel is certainly not accessible. It's the old city of Jerusalem. How could that be accessible? Alan traveled to Israel, traveled to their conference for 2 years before suggesting that we start Friends of Access Israel here in New York. The bottom left corner is Yuval Wagner with a Cobra helicopter. Yuval Wagner was paralyzed 6 months before Alan and started Access Israel over 20 years ago. He sent the letter to President Ezer Weitzman complaining that after he was injured, nothing was accessible in the state of Israel. He was furious. At the time, there was no email. So he sent a regular letter to Ezer Weitzman to complain. And Ezer Weitzman's secretary called and asked him to come to the president's home for a meeting. President Weitzman, a former combat pilot, came in spoke to him, knew that Yuval was still in the military because he is a very bright individual and very, very capable individual, apologized to them, and then gave him an order as a mefaked and told him to start an NGO, come up with a name, and make sure that Israel becomes the most accessible country in the world. Next slide, please. Last summer was the 20th anniversary of the opening of Access Israel at the home of Israel's president, Reuven Rivlin. Members of Knesset and 25 members and leaders from various parts of government were there, including people from technology, education, and advocacy. At the 20th anniversary gathering, and you can see it on the right picture, President Rivlin turned to me in English. Obviously, his Mossad agents didn't tell him that I was a Ramaz graduate and understood Hebrew perfectly. And he welcomed me with the following endorsement. He said, "Our friends from abroad, from the United States, welcome. We appreciate very much what you are doing because this is a humanitarian need for everyone, to respect human beings as a human being, not only as an Israeli or American, Brit, or Russian. We appreciate your cooperation and partnership, and God bless you." Today, the state of Israel is one of the most accessible countries in the world. Access Israel is one of 4 organizations which advise the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We run annual conferences on accessibility and disability, featuring over 1,500 people from 30 countries. Next slide. Why Kilimanjaro? It was on my bucket list, simply put. It was on my bucket list, and I felt that if I can do it with the injuries that I had, I could invite a bunch of people. And that's where it got a little out of hand in terms of how many people. And originally I thought 10, then 15. In the end, we had 27, many with paraplegia and other ailments. These pictures, 27 entered the park. Jamie Lassner was one of those that made it only to the second day. The gentleman with me on the bottom, with me on the left, his name is Amari. Amari, on Sunday, got married. On Tuesday, he was on the mountain with us and helped me down because I had a terrible reaction to the altitude medicine where my blood pressure dropped and became terribly dehydrated. Walked me down the hill to a car, then to an ambulance, got to the hospital. I was treated at the hospital for 2.5 hours. I had a nurse, a cardiologist, a doctor, a physician's assistant, 2 blood tests, 4 bags of IV fluid, and it cost me $8.11 for everything. The picture on the right is Amari, 2 hours and 11,000 feet by running up with Mara. And with that, it is a pleasure to call upon Howard.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Jamie was kind enough to invite me to last year's Access Israel conference in Israel. I came in the capacity as a presenter on inclusion in education and in summer camps. And I also came in the capacity of journalist for various publications. As Kenny was kind enough to say, my entire career has been spent in the Jewish disabilities inclusion space in many capacities, with camps and with Israel trips. It was a pleasure to attend the conference. And I would also reiterate, the attendance was unbelievable with people from many, many countries. And it was really one of the best professional conferences I have ever attended. One thing that really stood out is that many people with disabilities were in leadership and presenter roles. And that's not common for many conferences. I remember on one of our bus trips around Israel, I was sitting quietly overhearing a conversation between a blind entrepreneur and a blind programmer for Google India. and they were comparing notes about which blind readers they use in their work. Thanks to Access Israel and Phaser, the world is turning to Israel as the accessible startup nation. And I was honored when Jamie invited me to continue my affiliation with Phaser by climbing Kilimanjaro and capturing the experience for various publications. We were honored to be featured, to have a story. It was the cover story in the Jerusalem Post magazine, as well as for other Jewish publications, an Australian disabilities blog. And the most exciting and heartwarming, they accepted an article in an airline magazine of Precision Air. I doubt many people in this group have flown Precision Air. It's a Tanzanian airline based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and affiliated with Kenya Airways. Keep in mind that this magazine featured an article with numerous references to Israel and to Israeli innovation. Why is this significant? If you remember, there was a very sad bombing of the US Embassy in Nairobi in 2007. And right after that bomb went off, a second bomb went off in Dar es Salaam, which was likely linked to Osama bin Laden. And now Israel is all over a publication based there. Pretty amazing. There's another airline magazine in this corporation, Rwanda Air, which is going to be taking a second article of mine. And it was their idea to feature Tel Aviv, as they will soon be flying there. And the article focuses on another Israeli disabilities organization, Nalagaat, which I hope people have had a chance to experience in Jaffa, blackout dinner, deaf-blind theater, really amazing. As we'll come back to later, there is great potential to showcase Israel's commitment to accessibility, and this can really, really serve Israel well in its Hasbara efforts. Prior to the Kilimanjaro trip, I reached out to 4 participants on the trip. 2 of them are featured in the on either side of the aisle. We'll talk about each one of them in a moment. 4 people with paraplegia. And I also spoke with Omer Tsur, who, as you'll see in other slides, the people with paraplegia used a device to help get up the mountain called a trekker, a Paratrek trekker. It was a specially designed chair that Omer had designed to, it's kind of part durable chair, part rickshaw. I know that when Joey talks, and he can talk about how he helped people get up the mountain with his trekker, Ari Storch as well. It's a real team effort to get up there. And Omer designed this piece of equipment so that his father, who was paralyzed during the Yom Kippur War, could travel through Turkey for a month with Omer, as Omer was taking his 3-year post-army trek through the world. Omer reviewed hundreds of hours of GoPro video of Kilimanjaro to scout out the terrain, to maximize success of Marcella, Starla. These are the 2 women featured, Marcella on the left, and Starla with the cowboy hat on the right, and Arnold and Arnold, who you will soon meet. And you may be asking, how is it even possible? As you heard, climbing Kilimanjaro is really no walk in the park. So what about if you have paraplegia, where navigating airport security and boarding a plane on its own is not very simple? So let me introduce you to 4 extraordinary fellow travelers and teachers. Next slide, please. So this is the famous Paratrek trekker. Omer is the gentleman on the bottom left with the hat and with the wheel. As I mentioned, it requires assembly. It required careful packing up in Israel and transporting to Israel and maintenance along the way. And the person in the chair is able to do what he or she can do with their hands. And there are people in the front and people in the back who are helping. That's where porters and members of our delegation come in. Next slide, please. So this is Marcella. My journey started with a 90-minute conversation before the trip, and I was blown away. Marcella, she is many things. She's Peruvian born, Texas native, divorced, mother of a teenage daughter. She came to the US when she was 19 or 20 to study. And she was in a car with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, who was driving drunk, got into a terrible car accident, and she became paralyzed and a foot was amputated. And as you can imagine, this is a very, very crushing blow, and it was kind of hard to move forward. And after a tough period, when she realized that, you know, she really needs to move forward. And she has a lot of strengths. She's intelligent. She's a great conversationalist. She's very sociable, loves to hang out and dance and go to parties. And if you see the jean jacket on the bottom, this is her signature jacket all over Instagram. It says, "The journey of a brave woman." And it really speaks for itself. Part of what got her going, she went to went to Baltimore, I think to Johns Hopkins, to a rehab, and she was introduced to Rewalk, an Israeli wearable robotic exoskeleton. Some of you might remember it was made famous by an appearance in Glee in 2010. And she was the first person to show that it could also be useful for a person who's also an amputee. Marcella travels around the world documenting accessibility. I was often asked to take her iPhone and film her as she boarded planes, and she posts this all over the place. She's in the process of planning a trip to Machu Picchu for women with and without disabilities. One of the nicest moments when we were finishing the trip and returning home, she was coming through passport control, and a Tanzanian passport control agent did a double take when she blurted out that she had climbed Kilimanjaro. And he will never forget Marcella, nor will we. She's an amazing shlicha for Israel, for what is possible to accomplish with determination and with the right attitude. Next slide, please. Meet Starla and her husband Shannon on the lower left. We also spent a couple of hours talking on the phone before the trip. I did some writing before the trip for publication to introduce our trek. She's even more impressive in person than her very impressive presentation on paper. If she was Jewish, you would say she has the most incredible midot. And if she was a Ramaz student, she would have gravitated to Didi Benel's various chesed projects that she was known for over the years. She cares so deeply about her fellow human being, even when she could easily be the recipient of the kindness of others. As Jamie didn't mention this, but one very significant thing about Starla is that she is probably one of two people in the world who is twice paralyzed. I won't go into the details, but she was paralyzed on two separate occasions, the second time higher up on her spinal cord. She's also a mother, a wife, a party planner, an outdoors woman, an adventurer. She was selected as Ms. Wheelchair Montana in 2014. They live in Montana. She became the first wheelchair user to compete in the Mrs. Montana pageant in 2016. She's a founder of Moving Forward Adaptive Sports and a charity known as Gifts of Love. And she and Shannon are really, really an incredible team. The thing that stands out, I think, for all of us on the trip is her tremendous ability to maintain perspective, to not feel sorry for herself. She is a real believer. She has a strong belief in God. She made everything look easy, but there were so many barriers on the trip. Entering rooms, bathrooms are not accessible. Her body is always hurting, all kinds of unexpected medical issues. Yet this is the picture, these pictures don't lie. She was always smiling. I think an important moment on the trip, during a time early on when morale was a little bit low, we had lost Jamie from the trip, food was questionable, people were tired and fetching, and Starla was in her room. Shannon came to dinner and he listened to the conversation and he said, "I just want you to know Starla had a great day." And that was it. That was the end of the fetching for the group for the rest of the trip. Next slide, please. So this is Arnold. Arnold is in the center, surrounded by two other members of our community. You see Ari Storch, you see Barry Stein, and Joey on the side. Israeli. He traveled with Omer from Israel with all the truckers. On the other person with the red shmata on his head is Roi, another helper with the trucker. When Arnold was in the army, as he told me, he took the advice of Tzahal, which is to grab any moments you can to catch a little bit of sleep whenever and wherever possible. And as he sadly recounts, but in a joking way, he took that advice a little too seriously. He had an army vehicle on some time off, and he fell asleep at the wheel. And in his accident, he became paralyzed. Arnold is good. He's handsome. He's a college graduate. As he was getting released from rehab after his injury, his army friends were getting released from the army. And together, they took an 8-month trip to Australia. His tremendous sense of humor and his smile really helped him get by. He told several stories about being in a bar in Australia and people putting money on the table, lots of money, because they felt sorry for him. There's no need to feel sorry for him. He's currently replanning the trip he was supposed to take during Pesach, a 30-day trip from Eilat to Kiryat Shmona on horseback. You can't see it in the center photograph. You can see it on the left. He always wore gloves on his hands. It was very important for Arnold to feel that he was contributing as much as he could, and while the other porters and people from our group were helping him push and pull and all of that. He's not a religious guy, but he had a tremendous sense of responsibility to Klal Yisrael. It's not easy for him either, but he'd get up some mornings to help make minyan. We carried an Orach Chaim issued Sefer Torah up the mountain and used it every day for davening, every day that there was Torah reading, and also on Shabbat. We had a member who was saying Kaddish, and Arnold knew that he was needed at times to help be responsible for minyan. And on Shabbat, we davened in a room that was many steps up, and the group brought the Sefer Torah down, and Arnold had an Aliyah LaTorah. Arnold reminds us that if you look at him and you look at us, he would say, we have 100 things that are in common. If you're able to see past the chair, you'll see the things in common. If you get stuck on the chair, you see the one thing that's different between us. He also got pretty close to some of the members of the group, and I overheard some conversations. Some of the females in our group, some of the women in the group were asking him about dating, and he was speaking very candidly about whether you disclose on a dating profile that you have a disability. Really, really terrific guy. Looking forward to hearing about his horseback ride. Next slide, please. So finally, I want to introduce you to Arnold. Arnold warmed all of our hearts with his smile, with his determination, with his broken English. He grew up at the base of the mountain with family members serving as porters. So he is Tanzanian. He always wanted to climb, and Jamie and Fazer gave him the opportunity. He's currently 44 years old and the father of 3. As a teenager, he was a talented student and soccer player and came down with some type of acute illness that left him paralyzed and depended both on crutches and a wheelchair. He was the only member of the group with paraplegia who was able to walk a bit, and he was fiercely determined to do that. And again, warmed our hearts when he insisted on giving up his chair when another chair broke and walking as much as possible. We'll never forget when he addressed his fellow hikers on the last night, and look how proudly he displayed his certificate. So 4 very inspiring people and teachers. We are really, really blessed to know them all. And what an honor to participate in this trip and for publications to be so curious to hear about our trip. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard. And with that, we turn it over to one of Ramaz's greatest hockey legends, Joey Sokol.
I don't know about that. Before I begin, I just want to mention that despite the backdrop that Mara has, she did have a return ticket. She's back in New York. Okay, so the obvious question that always gets asked when I tell someone that I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro is, what made you do it? Why? And with 20 deaths a year, 35% not reaching the summit, the fact that I knew someone from Great Neck who went up the mountain with his son, who was a physician, thankfully, on the way back, on the way down, he shattered his ankle, had to be emergency helicoptered. A week before we left for our trip, Dr. Zaitchik from Ramaz told me about a story of a dear friend of his wife, Dr. Amram Cohn from Israel, who also was coming down the mountain with his daughter, had a heart attack and died. So why did I do it? I think the answer is quite obvious. But truthfully, Jamie sent a teaser back in the fall with these two gorgeous girls on wheelchairs. You can see them in the photo here. And he said, you know, if you join us, you could spend the week with them. So I guess the rest is history. I was sold. So tonight, Jamie, Mara, Howard, and myself told you, Mara will tell you about our shared experience, each one, you know, telling a different perspective of the journey. And what I'm going to speak about and elaborate on is the final 48 hours, which is the ascent, the final ascent of the mountain. But before I continue, I just want to acknowledge the person who is really most responsible for all of this, and that's Alan Brown. God gave me a very good memory, and it seems like yesterday I was on the 6th floor of the Upper School of Ramaz on 78th Street. It was right after winter break. I believe we were seniors, and Dan, his dear brother, you know, told us the unfortunate news and the tragic events. And I just want to wish Alan continued good health, continued strength, and you should continue, you know, being an inspiration for all of us. Love you dearly. So back to Kilimanjaro. On Friday, having hiked for 4 days, we had a 10-hour hike. Next photo, please. We arrived at what's called Kibo Hut. Kibo Hut is the hut or group of huts. It's kind of like Camp Seneca Lake with all the bunks, without showers, without bathrooms, and it's at the foot of the mountain. We arrived there after a 10-hour hike. About an hour before Shabbos, we put our stuff down, and then all of us congregated in a bunker to begin Shabbos. And by the grace of God, Mara had some candles with her. She lit them in a discreet corner, and one of us assumed the role of Chazan and began singing Kabbalah Shabbos. I'm not a very emotional person, but I did get a little teary-eyed, and I don't think I was the only one. The notion that we were so far from home, both in terms of distance as well as where the heck were we. But when Friday night comes, Shabbos begins, and a 5,000+ year tradition that we have commences. And it was a very, very moving moment of the journey. When I arrived at Kibo Hut, I had an incredible headache. I had eaten very little in 4 days. It is impossible to sleep, both because of the cold and everything is because of the effects of altitude. Altitude where we were at times would have only 50% of the oxygen that we currently have. It causes your heart to work a lot faster. It gives you this unabating headache, no appetite, as I said. And really the only way that this gets fixed is by coming down the mountain. So we spent Shabbos in the freezing cold, and it's difficult to appreciate right now in the middle of summer in New York, but just go outside in February, January in New York on the coldest night of the winter and say, you know, this is where I have to spend the next 8 days. At night, it was below zero. During the day, maybe it warmed up a little bit, but where we were in the mountain it was a very cold Shabbos. And the only way to get warm was to really just wear layer and layer and layer, stay in your sleeping bag, drink hot liquids. So we spent Shabbos at Kibo Hut, and then midnight, after Shabbos ended, we all gathered at the base of the mountain. And we all had headlamps. Next photo, please. We all had headlamps on. And actually, the photo before this has some pictures. But anyway, so we had our headlamps on, and we got wrapped up in lots and lots of layers. The liquid that we put in our water bottles had to be warm, lest it freeze on the way up. Those in wheelchairs, the earlier photo, you'll see Marcelo dressed up like a mummy in a big sleeping bag. They had to be very careful not to get frostbite. We actually ascended the mountain on a night that had a full moon. So the path was fairly well illuminated by the moon, and it was actually easy to see most of the time with our headlamps off. I remember at the beginning of the hike being extremely nervous. I had this incredible desire to sleep, the same desire someone has when they're trying to fight falling asleep at the wheel at night if they're driving. I just wanted to stop, put my head down. And again, this is all because of altitude. And then I was nervous whether I'd be able to summit the mountain. The ascent is 8 hours up, if you're lucky, 4 hours down to the base of the mountain where you started. And then we rested for a couple of hours, and then we start the 7-hour hike back to where we would ultimately spend the night. It's a very long day. And when I started, you just don't know whether you're going to be able to summit, and you really want to because you made a big effort to get there. And you also don't know, are you going to have issues with your heart? Are you going to have issues with your lungs? Are you going to have, other things that are going to preclude you from getting to the top? And as I said, up to 20 to 30 people die doing this every year. So there were 4 different terrains as we're ascending the mountain, and each one served as like a landmark to judge the progress that I was making. Each of us were assigned one porter on the final day, and you kind of, went up the mountain together. You start, with a 20-minute walk to the real base of the mountain. You walk extremely slowly. You put your left foot in front of your right foot, and then you catch up with your right foot. You take a few breaths, and then you repeat this exercise again. And you do this for 8 hours going up, 4 hours going down. It is exhausting. And every 10 to 15 minutes, you stop, try to catch your breath, have a drink of water. You had this, as I said, incredible desire to fall asleep, and you had to fight that. So we start up ascending the mountain. It's extremely steep. You're on like a 30 to 45 degree angle, and you're doing that for about an hour. Then you reach the second stage, which you have these, it's also steep, but you have these switchbacks going back and forth. The third stage is what they call the Scree. It's like this very fine, pebbly gravel. It's very slippery. You try not to fall, but everyone fell, and multiple times. Sometimes you're climbing up sideways just so you don't slide down the mountain. And then you get to the final stage, and you're probably 6 hours, no, you're probably about 4 hours into it right now. And they have these huge boulders, 12 feet high or so. 5 million years ago, they shot out of the volcano. Kilimanjaro was a volcano, active volcano. And the guide, the porter, would go up, about 20 feet or so, and he'd signal whether you should take that route. It was evident to me that my porter was not very well versed as to the right path, so we had to go up and come down, go up and come down until we finally got towards the top. As you get maybe an hour or so, a half hour to the top of this boulder field, you can see where the top of the mountain is. Now, there are 3 peaks to Kilimanjaro. The first one is Gilman, the second one is Stella, and then the ultimate highest point, which is the highest point on the continent of Africa, is Uhuru Point. And if you get up to Gilman, we were told, you get a prize, you get a little, you get a certificate that you summited the mountain. But in order to really get to the highest point, you then have to go another hour and a half, another about 1,000 feet of elevation to Uhuru Point. But I knew from what they told us that it flattens out. It's still steep, but it flattens out after you get to Gilman's, the first peak, and from there it's relatively easy. So once I got there, I felt reasonably confident that I'd be able to make it all the way. The top of the mountain, as you're ascending that last 1,000 feet, you're on like a knife's edge with, to the right, this beautiful volcano crater, which you had in the earlier picture. Tons of snow, and they commented to us that it was one of the windiest days that they've ever had on top of the mountain. And then you finally, as I said, you get to Uhuru Point, and there's a congregation of people there. There was actually a group from Israel that got there first, and you watch the sun go up. And is there a picture after this? You can see photos of the sun. Nope, not this. You can see photos of the sun. It's a beautiful sunrise coming up. And you want to get to the top of the mountain around 8 o'clock or so, because the sun is incredibly intense and you don't want to stay up there too long. You can get somewhat blinded, your skin can burn. Also, you want to start at midnight, which we did, so that you get to your final, your camp before sundown. So most of the accidents do happen on the descent. I will tell you that as soon as I reached the top, all my symptoms magically went away. Presumably they were emotional, but also a lot of it obviously has to do with altitude. And immediately as you start to descend, the symptoms of altitude start to very quickly abate. As I was coming down, I saw Mara Lassner being held up like Uncle Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's with 2 porters on her side. Joey Grunfeld, he actually probably enjoyed the top of the mountain because he spent like 17 hours on top. His knees, I think, gave out, and he had to be emergency evacuated on a wheelbarrow-like stretcher. He was voted the least likely to want to repeat this exercise and trip. Several others were puking on the side of the mountain as we were coming down. But all in all, let me tell you, achieved, accomplished, experienced. And am I still here?
Joey. Yep, that was great. Thank you, Joey.
Okay.
And last but not least, and this is true, the one that keeps me out of trouble, my dear wife, Mara.
Thank you, everybody. It was really an honor to have been able to participate in this amazing experience and all the new friends that I've made. I wanted to share more about the scenery and what we experienced day to day. The trek up Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa and the tallest freestanding mountain in the world, took Team Friends of Access Israel through 4 different climate zones, starting with a beautiful lush rainforest, through drier and less inhabited zones, until we felt we were on a movie set in the desert, and then to the Arctic zones. Each had its own beauty and charm. The weather changed too, from about 90 degrees and 90% humidity the first day to cooler days and frigid nights, with, as Joey said, temperatures below 0 and 30 to 40 mile winds. We had to be prepared for all weather and packed sunscreen, as well as rain gear, hats, gloves, gaiters, and ski pants. The terrain constantly changed, from grass, dust, to rocks, to boulders, through streams and scree, and sometimes areas that were very steep. I love the outdoors and really do try to stop and smell the roses, so I was excited about the opportunity, especially as one online description read that this is a virtual climatic world tour from the tropics to the Arctic. I was in. Tuesday, February 4th, we began. We started in the rainforest zone that ranges from 6,000 to just over 9,000 feet in elevation. It was green and lush, with twisted trees covered in moss, blue and colobus monkeys swinging, and unique flowers, including ones called an elephant's trunk that only grow in Kilimanjaro. We trekked a little more than 5 miles, but it took us all day. Wednesday, we hiked almost 8 miles, and Thursday was an acclimation day, both spent in the heather and moorland zones. The slower you ascend, the better your body acclimates to the altitude, and the more likely you are to reach the top. On Thursday, we went out and back about 3 miles to acclimate to the elevation. These zones were between 9,000 and 13,000 feet, where clouds were actually at eye level at some points. We did get caught in a storm and we walked through a cloud. Here we saw magnificent patches of grass and wildflowers. Sorry, you could see the monkeys and the flowers in the slide. Next slide, please. On Friday, we went to the Alpine desert zone with elevations between 13,000 and 16,000 feet. Here it's very dry and breezy, and we traversed over volcanic rock of different shapes and sizes. The annual rainfall there is less than 8 inches and the air is thin. There are many of the unusual ground cell trees which can be found, you guessed it, only on Kilimanjaro. They've been described to look as a cross between cactus and pineapples and have evolved over centuries to store their own water for survival. At this point, Kilimanjaro's summit came into perfect view and things started to get real. Saturday night, we ascended from the Alpine desert to the Arctic zone. For perspective, the peak of Kilimanjaro is about the height of almost 11 New York City's Freedom Towers. Life there is very sparse as oxygen levels are nearly half of what they are on the lower zones. High solar radiation during the day, freezing temperatures at night, gale force winds, and low oxygen make it quite difficult to spend a lot of time at the top. The trek was definitely more about the journey for me than the destination. Walking with new friends, talking, getting to know each other, hearing how the guides live, and being inspired by everyone was really the best part. People were so helpful and supportive of each other. Everyone shared snacks and hand and feet warmers, discussed when they were taking their malaria and altitude pills, and so much more. An eye-opening and truly inspiring part of the trip was Shabbat, when everyone had the opportunity to share their stories. We knew 4 of the group had paraplegia, but we did not know the invisible injuries that others had suffered, including PTSD. Yet, everyone was so positive, and I can't remember anyone complaining about being tired or their feet hurting or the like. If anything, they took a break and just kept going. As the week progressed and we bonded, we grew more tired and the air became thinner. The daily trek became harder and harder. To me, Friday and Shabbat felt like the last 6 miles of a marathon. You feel great that you have already done 20 miles, only to realize you have 6 miles more. Saturday night was showtime. We left at 11:30 in the dark with our headlamps, and we climbed up the 45-degree angle dormant volcano, Mount Kilimanjaro. We did switchbacks and just tried to keep focus and stay warm. We talked more and we counted our steps. We also tried to distract ourselves a bit, and I was dreaming about pizza. The dirt and the rock turned into snow below our feet. We were there right before Tu B'Shvat, the middle of the Hebrew lunar month, so there was a spectacular full moon guiding us, also as Joey had said. Some of the path was very narrow, only wide enough for one person. Somehow I made it to the first peak, Gilman's Point, on the rim of the crater. The full moon and the streaks of the rising sun encouraged and wowed us.
Next slide.
Sorry, next slide, please.
Sorry, dear.
Thank you for your help. The full moon and the streaks of the rising sun encouraged us and wowed us. After about another 2 hours of hiking along the narrow rim, I reached Stella Point, where I met with friends who assured me that I was almost at the Uhuru Peak, which reinvigorated me, so I pressed on. At this point, the sun was up and the sky was light. The scenery was spectacular. Untouched snow, the white snow and the ice, for as far as I could see, was amazing. At last, I made it to the westernmost peak of Mount Kilimanjaro at 19,341 feet. Many emotions swept over me, including excitement, disbelief, and gratitude. But I was one of the many at the top and just a small speck in the open expanses on the roof of Africa. I had traveled with our team from New York, New Jersey, Montana, Texas, Israel, Tanzania, and we met other people from equally distant lands, Japan, England, Iran, and Iraq. We were all united by the experience as the new day was dawning. Jamie's vision, Israeli technology, and the indefatigable perseverance of Omer and Roe and the guides and the porters made many dreams come true. The sense of accomplishment united us all and likely still empowers us. At the top, we waited our turn to take our picture and then turned around. I was sure there must be another way down. Nope, we had to go back through the compact, glistening snow and in some places the very narrow paths, but we did it, miraculously. Next slide, please. I learned so much from the trip and I'm truly grateful. The strength, courage, and positivity of my fellow trekkers got me to the top. I could never have done it without them. A message to the alumni and current students, dream big, the sky is the limit. God has created a truly spectacular world. Baruch Osem Maaseh Bereshit. Blessed are you, God, who makes the work of creation. Thank you all for getting me to the top.
Thank you, Mara. Leah, you can stay on this slide for now because it is a beautiful slide. I am communicating with Kenny, who has given me a time limit, and I'm going to respect that time limit. But we do have some questions that have come in that Kenny has sent to me, and I want to be able to answer those. So, Howard, let's start with you. We're going to have 4 or 5 questions. Then I'm going to wrap it up and call it an evening. The first question that came in for Howard is, how do you think we can use disabilities inclusion to help Hasbara in Israel? Obviously, we are Access Israel. We're bringing attention to Israel. How could we but how does disability inclusion help with Hasbara?
It's a really great question, Jamie, and whoever asked it. I think that this is a story that needs to get out. There are, as you started to say earlier, there are so many great things happening in Israel in the area of accessibility. There are so many. If one's looking to talk about problems in Israel, of course, there are things that we can talk about. It's so easy to shift the conversation. I'll give you a few examples. I suspect that very few people know Birthright Israel has brought about 750,000 people to Israel. They've been leading accessibility trips to Israel since 2001. They've brought about 2,500 people with developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, medical issues, addiction. That would be a wonderful story to get out. People should know that thousands of people can't come every year to the Access Israel conference from all around the world. 20 people from Austria who go back as these tremendous advocates and allies of Israel. There are so many programs in Israel. Many people know the programs like Shalva and Ale Negev, Beit Izi Shapiro, some wonderful programs. But there are dozens and dozens of great programs. So I think that becoming familiar with what's out there, there are accessible beaches. There are programs, like I mentioned, like Dialogue in the Dark. You can eat dinner simulating blindness. You can go to a museum in Holon, Children's Museum, which approximates what the experience of being deaf. Becoming familiar with some of the things. There's a law in Israel that a business needs to hire a certain percentage of people with disabilities. There is something called Israel Venture Network, which does social impact investing, and one of the sectors is disability. So I think that we need to become familiar and talk it up, and really make sure people understand how committed Israel is to accessibility and to inclusion.
Thank you, Howard. The next question, I'm going to go with Joey. It's a question that just came in from Kenny, and I'm going to combine 2 questions. You discussed the food, loss of appetite, and so on, but you did spend, or we did spend, well, you guys spent several nights on the mountain, and you also had to have bodily functions, and you also had to keep clean. Where did you sleep? How did that take place? Give an idea of what an evening was like on the mountain.
I'm just curious who wants to know about my bodily functions, but is this Kenny Rothman? Very fortunate. I was going to mention it before, I forgot, but fortunately, I went 5 days without having to squat. And, that was something I was very grateful for. So, and that was, something to be concerned about. Sleeping at night was incredibly difficult. It was so cold. We took these altitude pills that would make you go to the bathroom. And so in the middle of the night, sub-zero conditions, you had to get out of your sleeping bag, and, guys were able to just go outside. I don't know what you women did, but it was probably more challenging. So it's absolutely freezing at night. I was in my sleeping bag. I tried to meditate a little bit, just close your eyes and concentrate on your breathing. But getting into a sleep was just absolutely impossible. And this persisted every night. The food was decent. It was okay, but I really didn't have much of an appetite. In the morning, you'd fill up your bottles, put a little drink mix in it, and have a few power bars. And that was pretty much in the way of nourishment for the time that we were on the mountain.
Okay. Somebody sent in a question. noticed that there were not many women on the trip. Mara, as one who wasn't on the mountain, found out who your roommates were. You spent a lot of time with Marcella and Starla, two remarkable women. As I said in 2 interviews, as gorgeous as they are on the outside, they are even more gorgeous, glamorous on the inside. Tell us a little about Marcella and Starla and your experiences with them.
Agreed, they were definitely as beautiful inside as well as outside. They are so positive, so kind, giving, fun, great to talk to. They were just amazing, inspirational. One night, it was pretty late, and as we alluded to earlier, as everything was an issue. So things that we take for granted, getting into bed, out of bed, these things can definitely be difficult for them, but they never let it get them down, including one night after a very long day, the poles to the paratrekker had to be removed to get into the cabin. And then once inside the cabin, the wheels had to be changed because the wheels were too wide to fit into the bathroom. That was one night that we actually had a bathroom in our room. But they never let anything get them down. They were really a lot of fun. And if you just, aside from the chair, you wouldn't know that they had any issues. But they really deal with lots and lots every day, and we should always be grateful for what we have, but we also need to realize that should really try to help them in many, many ways.
Okay, there are 2 more questions, Howard. Let's go with Joey's first. In the article that you wrote for the newspaper in Great Neck and in knowing you, you seem like a somewhat spiritual person. In the 9 days that you were on the mountain, did you see, or do you see a change in your thinking about different able-bodied people? Obviously, you were in Daniel's class, so you knew a little about it before, but once you spend time with all these people, what changed?
So I'll just say very quickly that, yeah, I'm a spiritual, I'm a sensitive person. There was a 10-year period in my life from about 2000 to 2010 where I lost a sister at a young age who was Ramaz graduate, Sharon Sokol, to breast cancer at age 36. My mother passed away. I had a very close brother-in-law of mine who passed away from pancreatic cancer. And so in this decade, I had lost a lot of loved ones. And I had an appreciation for, time being very finite. And I also am someone who likes to do things. And so I try to pack in as much as I can with the time I have. And none of us know how much time we have. And if there was anything that was evident from this trip, it was the notion of seeing those in wheelchairs just pushing on and just being so optimistic and being so fearless. And they very much embody the same sense of, just to do as much as we can. And I'll say right now with the pandemic going on and the quarantine and all the changes that are going on in our lives, that, look at those that were in wheelchairs going up Mount Kilimanjaro. Look at Stella, look at Marcella, look at Arnold Arnold, and just see the smiles on their faces and the optimism they have. And I think all of us, when we go through the challenges that we're going through right now, should remember those 4 individuals and how incredibly courageously they went up that mountain. And if there's anything that I got from this trip, it's that we should celebrate challenges. Period.
Well,
Beautiful.
you moved me. Howard, we're going to take 2 more questions, Kenny, and then I promise we're done. These are good questions, I promise. This one was
The whole thing is great.
from Leah. Leah, in our conversation, asked if Howard, 2 or 3 minutes, if you could provide a quick lesson on how to properly address someone with a disability. Unfortunately, there are old terms, new terms. What is the proper way to address somebody with a disability, and if there are any specific examples?
So I guess my playful answer would be to say you should address them as Marcella, Starla, Arnold, Arnold. Address them by name. Show them respect. Eye contact. Don't talk around them. Sometimes there's a temptation if they're with their a helper or spouse to talk through that person. Talk directly to them. There are some general principles. One principle is using person-first language. Right? A person, you would say, he's a person with an intellectual disability. She's a person with a developmental disability. She's a person who uses a wheelchair. We wouldn't, like, wheelchair bound is not a nice thing to say. I know that when many of us were growing up, they used the word retarded. There was even, when I was in college, there was the Journal of Mental Retardation. But that's definitely a term that's out. We talk about having an intellectual disability or cognitive disability. What's interesting is, even though I just talked about using person-first language, there are some exceptions to that rule. People with autism, in the autism community, people prefer to have like disability-first language, very proudly calling themselves the autistics, right? Same thing with people who are deaf. There's a lot of pride about being part of the deaf community. So I think a good rule is that whenever you're in doubt, is really ask a person how they prefer to be referred to. But I think people know when you really show respect and that you're really with them. People are very happy to answer questions. I think that what Arnold had said to us, if you think about it, there are so many things that we have in common. And the only thing separating you from that person is that one aspect of them. So hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Howard. And I'm going to wrap it up with a question, and then that we received, and also make a final remark. If you could turn to that last slide, Leah, that we have of Shango Village, that would be great. So the question that was asked of us is, how has COVID affected our organization? Basically no different than any other organization. I happen to be lucky. I'm in one room, Mara works in the other room for Ramaz, and I have to knock on the door when I go into her office, and she has to knock on the door when she comes into my office, and that's how we're doing it. But in terms of us, we're very much hands-on, so we haven't been able to go out and advocate. We haven't been able to go out and do what we call the Feast of the Senses, where we sensitize people to what it is to have a disability. We were planning on running a camp in Israel for people with severe disabilities. We have a conference that was supposed to take place for 1,500 people from 25 countries that Howard mentioned about. And of course, we had the Kili trip, the second Kilimanjaro trip, scheduled for August. We changed that, and with that, I'm going to talk about this slide as well. One of the things that I recommend, and that Alan just texted me, is there is an outstanding movie on Netflix called Crib Camp. It's about a woman by the name, I think it's Judy Human, who is an aunt of a friend of Alan's, who went to camp, and it was basically people with disabilities, all types of disabilities, and a bunch of hippies taking care of them during the summer. I'm not going to tell you all of it. I will tell you it is not a PG movie, but it makes it very clear what life is all about. And she is probably one of the founders, if not the leaders, of the ADA community here in America. She is a member of the federal government. She works with the federal government. A very, very, very powerful movie as well. So I'm going to close with Shango Village. We were told about Shango Village by a young lady, Stephanie, who lives in Teaneck, who had gone to Arusha, which is the second town we went to, and told us about two places: a synagogue, which we didn't really get to talk about, we could talk for 50 hours, for hours. It was such an incredible trip. Shango Village is exactly what it says there. It employs people with disabilities. Everybody who works there has a contract. They have to show up to work, and they create, they're a successful social enterprise. They employ people with disabilities, and they create unique, high-quality handmade jewelry, glassware, and houseware. I will tell you they are having a sale right now if you're interested. Spectacular stuff. I was busy talking to Ruth, who's the lady on the right, who I'm hugging, about what they do there and how we can work with them. So I didn't see some of the jewelry that Mara purchased there. Really spectacular and done with absolute love. In the process of our visit there, we met Masood. Masood is the gentleman in the middle there. His name is Masood. He is a small person. And he started questioning about what we do, what we're doing there. Some of us had our green sweatshirts with us that said Kilimanjaro. He has friends and family who are porters on the mountain, and was quite emotional about the fact, he works here because of his disability, but no one ever has given him the opportunity to climb Kilimanjaro. So I spent some time with Ruth. We talked about it. And at the age of 35, we informed Masood that Phaser is going to sponsor his trip this summer in August up Kilimanjaro. And the mantra is accessible together. Anybody who has went on this trip, and even me who only made it to 10,000 feet, you see what everybody's strengths are and how everybody can push the other person forward. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to cancel all the trips, the advocacy trips, the Feast of Senses trip, our camp in Israel, our conferences, our meetings. We had a trip planned to Montana to speak to 5,000 students in high schools there. We had to cancel that. And unfortunately, we had to postpone Kilimanjaro 2 to January 2021. And I had to call Masood and tell him. And it was one of the most difficult calls I had to make. We had promised him for this summer, and he fully understood. He was extremely mature about it. He said, okay, I'll keep training. And there is a video on our social media, which I think they're doing a YouTube of this. You'll have our social media. You can look at it. He actually was pretty good at making a fool out of me in a lovely way. 2 weeks after we canceled, we decided to do a virtual Kilimanjaro expedition here in New York, in the United States, basically getting people to walk or run or roll or scooter or swim 24 miles between now and the middle of August. 24 miles is the distance between the camp down at the bottom of Kilimanjaro and the peak. And several people are starting to join and have joined us. And we posted it on social media. Ruth, the young lady with the jewelry around her neck and on the right that I'm hugging, jewelry made in Shango. So when she gets this, she'll thank me for the advertisement as well. Calls me up and said to me, there's someone who wants to talk to you. And they put him on with a translator. And he says, I have to find out through social media that you're doing a 24-hour virtual. I had to train. So he said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And we found a sponsor for him. It's a small amount. And he's the first person to finish. He actually did the 24 miles with a group of the people from Shango Village, and is scheduled to go with us in 2021. So in closing, I want to thank Howard, Joey, and Mara, thank Leah, thank Kenny, and above all, thank Rabbi Lutstein.